to start.
Good morning, everybody. This is Melissa McMaster. I'm a restoration coordinator with the Tamarack Coalition.
Good morning. This is Anna Schrank. I work for Friends of Verde River Greenway as their program manager, and I'm also the coordinator of the Verde Watershed Restoration Coalition.
And this is Ben Bloodworth. I'm with the Tamarack Coalition. Work as the program coordinator for the Tamarack Beetle Monitoring and Education Program.
And this is Kristen Jesperson. I am the funding program coordinator with the Tamarack Coalition, and I work with multiple partnerships to help them raise the dollars they need to do their work.
Okay, and so let me know as soon as who's going to speak first, Melissa?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So you can go ahead to the next slide.
Okay. There we go. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to just start out by giving a brief introduction to the two organizations that we all of us presenters work for. The Tamarack Coalition is a small nonprofit. We're based in Grand Junction, Colorado, but we also have representatives in Arizona as well. The mission of the Tamarack Coalition is to advance restoration in riparian lands through education, collaboration, and technical assistance. We work with a variety of different partners, including Friends of the Verde River Greenway, which you'll hear more about later on. And we work with those partners to address invasive species and restoration in riparian areas. So our name is a little bit of a misnomer. We do work a lot with tamarack issues, but we also work with other invasive plant species and a lot with restoration of native plants in the in riparian areas. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback all of a sudden and can't quite hear.
Okay. Sometimes that happens if you're calling in on your phone and you've got it on your computer as well. So if you've got both activated.
Okay.
Melissa's got a lot of feedback coming in, she said. All right. We'll have.
Okay, well, I'll just keep going and try and filter it out.
She's having.
Okay, so next slide, please. All right, so the Friends of the Verde River Greenway is one of the partnerships that the Tamarack Coalition works with. Their mission is to restore, preserve, and promote the natural, cultural, scenic, and recreational resources of the Verde River and its tributaries. And you are going to hear more about the Friends of the Verde from Anna shortly. Next slide. Okay, great. So I just want to start from a commonplace here, give some definitions and give you a little bit of visuals. So riparian areas are the interface between the land and a river or stream, some sort of body of water. Riparian areas in the west tend to be characterized by ribbons of green that are bisecting the more arid landscapes. In this photo, you can see the small river that's running through a canyon here, and it's flanked by lush green riparian plants that then abruptly transition into the more arid landscapes. Next slide. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
I can hear you, and without the feedback.
Okay, perfect. Riparian areas, the importance of riparian vegetation, sorry. So why do we care about having healthy riparian vegetation along rivers and streams? The reasons are likely similar for rivers no matter where you live, but having these healthy riparian areas provides habitat for fish and wildlife in the form of food, shelter, and water availability. These riparian systems are also essential in the West for dissipating the high energy levels that occur during floods that we see from runoff from snow in the winter or after large monsoon storms. These areas, the vegetation along the riparian areas, are also essential for filtering water, especially in areas with high sediment loads that exist in the water. They retain the sediments and the nutrients from terrestrial runoff and also from the overbank flows of the rivers, providing good nutrients to the soils. And the riparian vegetation is key for maintaining good water quality and replenishing the soils along the riverbank. Healthy riparian areas also dictate much of the geomorphology of a river system and can mitigate erosion by stabilizing the riverbank. They also provide the buffers that maintain channel geomorphology. And last, it's really important to have healthy riparian vegetation to keep the water temperatures in the rivers and streams low, which also helps to keep higher dissolved oxygen. Next slide, please. All right, so what is the condition of our rivers in the West? On average, about 80 to 90% of the riparian areas in the West have been lost, degraded, or altered. In Colorado, we currently have about 1 million acres of riparian land, but that's only about 50% of what originally existed. In Arizona, we have even less riparian areas and about 280,000 acres, and it's estimated that somewhere between 60 and 90% of the riparian areas in Arizona have been lost. There are several different factors that play heavily into the loss of these areas. Agricultural conversion, converting many of the riparian areas and floodplains into agricultural lands for growing a variety of different crops, development across and throughout the West, mining in whether it's gravel or uranium or other mining institutions have really degraded some of these lands as well. The creation of reservoirs, sort of the water storage in general, or the use of water for different variety of things, water diversions, dams. And then what we're going to focus talking about today is invasive plant infestation and how that has really altered and degraded a lot of the riparian areas throughout the West. Next slide, please. Okay, I want to talk specifically about invasives and how the altered riparian areas really have made it easier, the altered systems have made it easier for the invasives to dramatically impact these systems. So rivers in the Southwest generally have bimodal fluctuations. We see higher flows as a result of the winter runoff, usually in late spring and early summer. And then we also see another peak of high flows in the rivers during July through September as a result of monsoon storms. So the changes in the hydrology from dams, diversions, all of those alterations have dramatically altered the riparian systems in a variety of ways. So over the past several decades, we've seen a decline in the overbank flooding and also in the scouring flows that is essential for the success and establishment of primary riparian species like cottonwoods and willows. The reproductive strategies of these species has evolved to be strongly tied to the high flow events, which means that the moist, nutrient-rich soils along the riverbanks, that system no longer exists. And so it's, the cottonwoods and willows and species like that aren't able to reproduce as easy. The lack of the higher scouring flows also means that leaf litter from both native and non-native species has been able to accumulate, and that makes it much more difficult for native species to establish. Also, without having that flush of the system, we're seeing an increase in soil and water salinity along most of the rivers in the Southwest. These altered systems are also not as conducive to native plant establishment in general, and like I mentioned, they often prohibit natives from establishing at all. We're also seeing some decline in groundwater tables. That can become an issue because often that will favor invasives because they're more tolerant of drought and of drier conditions, and they're able to tap into resources that native plants might not be able to. The declining groundwater tables also poses many challenges associated with active restoration. So many of the techniques that are employed in the Southwest involve being able to plant trees and shrubs into the groundwater, and when we see that groundwater decreasing, it makes it much more challenging. So you go from a situation where you only need to have a cottonwood, for example, that needs to be able to go down, 3 to 5 feet to hit the water table, to suddenly the groundwater is down at 10 feet, and so that takes a lot more resources and just sort of makes it exponentially more challenging in that way. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a list of some of the species that we are most concerned with along our rivers here in the west and southwest. For woody plants, we have tamarisk, also called salt cedar, Russian olive, tree of heaven, and Siberian elm. The herbaceous plants we focus on are Phragmites. There's an exotic species of Phragmites that we see infesting our rivers here. Giant reed, Russian knapweed, hoary cress, and perennial pepperweed. All of these species have very similar qualities. They tend to form dense monocultures. They displace natives. Many of them alter soil characteristics. They provide degraded habitat for wildlife. And in some areas, the infestation is thick and heavy and dense. But in other areas, these plants are just now starting to creep in. And so there's an opportunity to really be proactive and control these species before they make permanent and significant changes to the ecosystem. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to give you just a little bit of information about tamarisk in particular and highlight this one as it's one of the most commonly treated species and also one of the most controversial, as we'll hear later from Ben. So tamarisk was brought to the U.S. in the 1800s as an ornamental. It has beautiful pink flowers, and it was also brought in for bank stabilization. It's a deciduous tree that is shrub-like, sometimes is tall enough to look more like a tree, and it tends to grow in very dense monocultures. It's a really unique plant. It has a number of traits such as really high seed production, saline soil tolerance, deep tap roots. These traits have led it to being a dominant woody plant species along many of the riparian corridors along the Southwest. It's also fairly flood resistant. Some estimates say that it can remain submerged for up to 70 days, and then it is also very drought resistant. So these traits and qualities make a situation so that this plant has really been able to proliferate and spread both up and down rivers throughout the Southwest. There are also several different species that are found in the U.S., and a couple of those have already been seen to be hybridizing. Next slide, please. So despite its proliferation along our waterways in the west, it can be very detrimental to these novel ecosystems. As I said, it forms dense monocultures. It also outcompetes native plants. It can be poor wildlife habitat, but it's often the only habitat that's available for endangered species like the southwestern willow flycatcher and the yellow-billed cuckoo. And we'll hear more about the southwestern willow flycatcher soon. Tamaris also can channelize the banks, which in some cases channelization is good, but what's happening in a lot of these systems is that we're getting very incised banks, and so we're not seeing those higher floods and flows being able to go up and over the banks anymore, turning them into very channelized systems. It also can alter the soil salinity. Because it grows in those dense monocultures, it can inhibit recreational and agricultural access, and it can sometimes increase wildfire activity. Next slide, please. So I just have a couple of pictures that I just want to show you just to kind of give you a visual of some of the situations that we find ourselves working with in invasive plants and restoration along the river. So here we have an area along the Dolores River here. You can see the tamarisk tree in the front there. And this area was dominated, the overstory was dominated with tamarisk, the understory was dominated with Russian knapweed. And next slide will show what happened after treatment. Here you can see the tamarisk removed. You can see some cottonwoods in the background there. They don't have leaves on them right now, but you can see the taller trees there. So we have some native overstory that's there, and all of the Russian knapweed was treated, and the tamarisk was removed. And then, next slide. Three years later, we can see a really nice, healthy understory that has lots of native grasses, forbs, and shrubs. And this area was seeded, and so there was input into the system to help it to develop into a healthier riparian ecosystem. But this is just one example of a transition from a tamarisk, Russian knapweed dominated area to a healthier riparian area. And then I have one more example, next slide. Here we have an area that was dominated by tamarisk and Russian olive. You can see the Russian olive has the more silvery color there, and the tamarisk is the greener. And this area was treated, and then 10 years later, after treatment and removal of the invasive species as well as planting of cottonwoods and other species, we can see we have the beginnings of a really nice riparian cottonwood gallery forest beginning here. So that's it for the introduction. Anna is going to talk next about the Verde and give you some specifics about what that partnership is doing.
All right, thank you, Melissa. So I wanted to share some elements of our partnership that have been successful for us. But just a little background, the Verde River watershed is located in central Arizona and is part of the lower Colorado River Basin. The Verde is a unique system in the West in that there aren't any impediments for its first 160 miles. It's spring-fed from the ground at Sullivan Lake in the community of Paulden, which is southwest of Flagstaff. And it flows about 195 miles before it enters the Salt River system. And it's also Arizona's only federally designated wild and scenic river. It's a critical flyway for migratory birds and provides critical habitat for the southwest willow flycatcher and the yellow-billed cuckoo, as well as several native fish and also 2 garter snakes. The Verde River supports rare cottonwood and Gooding willow gallery forests, which there are only 20 left in the world, and also a very intact mixed broadleaf association. The Verde is a pretty flashy system, so we are getting those sediment loads and native recruitment of those native species. But the growing threat to these riparian forests is the invasive plants that's become an issue to the health and sustainability of this critical habitat. So stakeholders, including the U.S. Forest Service, there's 3 forests within our watershed, the Tonto, the Coconino, and the Prescott. We have 2 National Park Service units within the watershed that lie on riparian areas. We have over 1,700 private landowners that own property connecting to those riparian corridors, and we also have several state park units as well. All of these partners or stakeholders were doing their part to control invasive plants. But really we felt to get ahead of the invasion, we really needed to develop a strategic approach to controlling these plants, and also a need for increasing collaboration between those stakeholders so that we could share resources and find techniques that work the best so we would have the best success. Next slide, please. The 4 target species that our stakeholders felt were the most threatening to the Verde system were tamarisk and tree of heaven. And for those 2 species, we knew that we weren't going to eliminate them from our system. There's way too much of it. The Verde Valley is located in a legacy mining community, and when they closed the mine in Jerome in 1950s, the mining company spread tree of heaven along the mine tailings to promote some growth of vegetation to stabilize those hill slopes. So we knew we weren't going to eliminate those species, but we want to reduce, our goal is to reduce those 2 species to less than 10% cover on those sites. But for giant reed and Russian olive, we had an opportunity to really eliminate those species. There was an early detection rapid response opportunity here. As we got going on inventory, though, we found that we had a lot more arundo in our system than we ever expected, and it'll take us a lot longer to eliminate that species from the system. Next slide, please. So the Verde Watershed Restoration Coalition was born. We gathered stakeholders together to develop a strategy and during several workshops, and the result of those workshops was the development of a partnership, a public-private partnership with all of our public land management agencies participating, and as well 225 private landowners are also participating. We're working on a watershed scale. We developed a 5-year management plan, which we're in our 5th year of implementing. And I just wanted to also say those private landowners, those 225 private landowners, they collectively own and manage about 65% of the private riparian land within the corridor. So we've got all of those large landowners participating and a lot of very small ones as well. Next slide, please. I think you need to advance one more. So we developed guiding principles to help and guide this process, working collaboratively together, selecting those techniques that really give us the best success, doing outreach in our local communities, educating landowners about alternative plants and preventative ways that they can tackle some of these invasive plants. Not just the 4 that I mentioned, but also a slew of secondary species as well. And also to implement this project on a system, using a system-wide approach. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to go over our goals. You know, I think one of the successes of our partnership is that while developing these goals, we made them, we set realistic targets. And so we, like I said before, we knew that we weren't going to eliminate Ailanthus, and Tamarisk. So that goal of that 10% is working. We're also, we wanted to eliminate seed sources from other plants to prevent further infestations, to allow our riparian and wetland areas to really become more natural functioning, more sustainable, and resilient to change over time. Next slide, please. We also set social, economic, and management goals, which we felt were equally important to the success of our partnership and our goals to control invasive plants. So providing education and outreach to the local public is high on our priority list. We offer information and technical services to private landowners that want to do this work on their own, but also provide on-the-ground work from our crews at no charge to them to do this work. And that's enabled us to really build trust within our private landowners, especially with our public land management agencies. Next slide, please. We also felt that we really wanted to keep as much of our resources within our local community. So we're supporting a local veterans crew, and also we have support local youth conservation corps that are based out of the Verde Valley for the full 6-month season that we run to control these species. We're also working with local herbicide companies to provide all of our mixing, so we take that out of the hands of our crews, and providing those local employment opportunities so that they can develop skills and move on and become our next generation of conservationists. Next slide, please. And also, lastly, our management goals. We've established a multi-stakeholder group that's very engaged. We have a 20-member steering committee that guides the process, but also working groups that further guide this process and have enabled us to be successful in implementation. And I think one of the most important aspects of doing any riparian restoration work is having a monitoring plan that is not only short-term but long-term, so that you can really see the effectiveness of your treatments and use the results of that to adapt your management style. Next slide, please. So to prioritize our treatment in our management plan, we develop not only site but also species prioritization. And so we're working in the upper parts of our watershed first, moving downstream because seeds flow downstream, and also propagules. We're also prioritize our projects on a species basis. So if we have only 5% tamarisk on a site or tree of heaven, but we don't have any tree of or arundo or one of the rationale of those zero tolerance species, we might pass up that site to go to a site that is more that has those zero tolerance species or has greater than 10% of those tamarisk or tree of heaven. We also look at our partner priorities. So our planning and implementation subcommittee meets several times a year to prioritize annual treatments, working with the Forest Service, the Park Service, our state parkland representatives to prioritize treatments based on their own agency priorities as well. I always think of five really critical things that we need to successfully implement projects. And of course, we need funding. We've been, I'll talk a little bit more about our funding on the next slide. But the landowner or manager needs to be willing. Permits need to be obtained. Of course, the capacity to implement the project needs to be available. And also, a monitoring plan needs to be in place so that we're not just dumping our money down the drain. Slide, please. So I'm proud that we've been able to acquire a diverse funding array with the help of our partners. One of our main funders in the beginning was the Walton Family Foundation. They have a freshwater initiative that we're a part of. There's about 9 partnerships within the Colorado River Basin that they're supporting. And one critical part that they provided us was capacity funding. So not just only funding to do work on the ground, but also funding to build capacity within Friends of Verde River Greenway, who's the lead nonprofit leading the Verde Watershed Restoration Coalition. And then an array of other private foundations, local partners, including those private landowners. Sometimes they're maybe not giving cash resources, but they're providing critical in-kind resources that are used as match for our projects. And also other local and regional partners like the Tamarisk Coalition and the Nature Conservancy are also providing funding. Our federal and state partners have also provided us funding through cooperative agreements. So we have cooperative agreements with all 3 forests, plus our Park Service, National Park Service, and Game and Fish Department. And that enables us to share funding more easily. And then also we're also able to apply for grant funding through several other state funding programs, like our Arizona State Forestry Invasive Plant Grant Program, and also our Arizona Water Protection Fund program. Next slide, please. So over the past 4 years, we've been able to accomplish a lot together. We've treated about 7,000 acres within our watershed and counting. Right now I have 43 individuals on the ground working, so that number is increasing as we speak. We've been able to map and inventory over 10,000 acres within the watershed on our riparian corridors. And just in the last 2 years, we've started to do the monitoring and the maintenance required to ensure that our projects are successful. We've trained over 100 individuals, both veterans and young adults, to do this work, and they've gained a lot of skills, and many of them have moved into other agency jobs locally or moved in or have continued into higher education in conservation fields. So I feel like our partnership has been very successful in training individuals, putting people on the ground to do this work, and accomplishing a lot. And we're close to meeting our planned acres. Maybe not this year because of the dense stands of Arundo donuts that we're finding in our tributaries, but we're on our way to providing better habitat to federally listed species, access to our rivers and creeks, which were sometimes prevented by these invasives, and also increasing the education and engagement of our community members in these projects. And I think that's my last slide. Let's see. And you're up.
All right. Well, thanks, Anna. So I'm going to shift direction a bit and talk about an aspect of riparian systems here in the Southwest that's a little more focused, and that the Verde is not yet having to address, but maybe doing so soon. So as many of you probably know and have done, there are lots of control options for dealing with invasive species, one of which is tamarisk, typically mechanical, chemical with use of herbicide, prescribed fire, though usually we only recommend that for pile burning and not broad scale prescribed fire and riparian systems. And then the biological control option. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is the use of a more natural biological control option for tamarisk. Next slide, please. So biological control, if you're not familiar with it, is basically bringing together a prey species with its native predator. In this case, the tamarisk is the prey, and that predator that is hoped to be effective in the biological control program is the tamarisk beetle. Next slide, please. So basically the point of biological control is to bring the numbers of the target down more naturally versus having to use herbicide or mechanical means. So to do that, you have to first find a prey species that will, or excuse me, a predator species that is effective, but only effective on that prey item. So in the late 80s, the Department of Agriculture's APHIS program, which is the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, but deals with bringing in any non-natives into the United States, which includes biological controls, started to work with some entomologists to try to locate effective means of reducing tamarisk by seeing what controls tamarisk in its native environment in Asia and the Mediterranean. So they began to look for all different kinds of bugs. Other pathogens were considered as well, but there were basically 200 agents that were looked at. It was narrowed down to about 20, and then in the early 90s, the tamarisk beetle, or Diarabda species, was settled on as what would probably be the most effective, and was tested against a bunch of different hosts. So this was to assure that it would not move into any of the agricultural species that we have, any native species, any plants anyone would care about in their yard or anything like that. So host specificity looks at absolutely everything to see if the beetle will eat any of that. And it would not. It's very specific to tamarisk. Individual species of beetle or even specific to individual species of tamarisk. So it received approval from the Technical Advisory Group and then was tested in cages in Nevada and approved for limited open release in 2001. Next slide. So there's a picture of the beetle down the bottom there compared to the size of a dime. So a little guy that can do a lot of damage to tamarisk. Next slide. Here are some different growth forms of the beetle. There are actually 3 different stages of instar larvae, which look a lot like a caterpillar, but they only have 6 legs. As they molt through, next slide please, the larva is really what does the majority of the damage to tamarisk plants. It does this by actually scraping chlorophyll from the leaves. So the leaves are just completely desiccated or dried out, and this is what leads to the defoliation. They don't actually consume the leaves, they just remove the parts that they need from those leaves. Next slide, please. Once the plant has been completely defoliated, or once the larvae are just to the stage of pupation, they drop down into the leaf litter where they pupate and move into the adult beetle stage. Next slide, please. And from this point, disperse to look for new untouched tamarisk. So they're looking for green tamarisk. They recognize it by chemical phenols that it releases, and then once the beetles find it, they release their own pheromones which call in other beetles. Next slide, please. And in huge populations, you can have sites like this where you may have hundreds of thousands of beetles in one area. Next slide, please. These areas are called the leading edge, and it's where just hundreds and hundreds of beetles are breeding, and they stop. This picture you see here, the green trees in the foreground, that's not a different species, that's just the beetle hasn't gotten there yet. It's moving through this massive stand of tamarisk, and that is kind of where the adults stopped. Then they will again go through that cycle and disperse out. The beetle's generation is about 5 to 6 weeks. In northern latitudes, typically see 2 to 3 generations of beetle. In southern latitudes, like down El Paso and Texas, southern Texas and Mexico, may have as many as 6 generations of beetles in a year. Next slide, please. So the point of biocontrol is not to eradicate the target. Obviously, that wouldn't work very well for the biocontrol agent if they completely ate themselves out of house and home. Next slide, please. So what it is intended to do is establish an ecological relationship between that predator and prey to restore a more natural to its home range system. Next slide, please. So here in the United States, what we're having is a shift in the current ecological relationships that still has not reached an equilibrium, still not entirely sure exactly what it will look like in the end. Next slide, please. But what we are seeing across the landscape are areas of complete defoliation of tamarisk, and the natives are still left in place. This particular slide in Chenille Wash is all the brown you see is tamarisk, all the green is native willow. Next slide, please. Here's another kind of closer view of the impact that beetle can have. This is here just west of us in Grand Junction. You can see this is a 3-year period. These tamarisk are not necessarily dead, but they are defoliated. Next slide, please. Just another shot on one of the original places that they were released, just south of Moab on the Colorado River. Next slide. So when the beetles attack the tamarisk and defoliate it, they do not kill it necessarily. The tamarisk will refoliate. Often it looks as it looks here. They call it poodling because its little puffs of green has a much kind of softer appearance to it. Next slide, please. And it happens in different parts of a river system and different parts of the year or across years. This graph here, the 0 to 100, is actually river miles, or kilometers in this case. So you can see that at the top in 2008, there was just a small number of beetles in the lower part of the reach. In 2009, a lot more beetles and completely crossing the lower reach, but then the next year they all moved upstream. So no defoliation, or none, very little defoliation occurred in 2010 on the lower reaches. So the beetles will move to where green tamarisk is. They may hit an area twice in a year if it greens back up, or it may just be once every 3 years. They're just looking for food. Next slide, please. So mortality of the tamarisk is not a given with the beetle, and there is no clear pattern related to beetle activity and plant mortality. What we do see is a drastic reduction in flowering. The plant puts all of its energy into just staying alive and putting out new leaves versus flowers. So if the plant is continually defoliated, it won't flower. Once that defoliation stops, flowering may occur 2 to 3 years later and start again. Mortality is very much dependent on the individual plant characteristics. If they're plants that are fast growing and do not store a lot of starch in their roots, they tend to be knocked back more quickly by the beetles. And then stressors, whether the plant is under drought stress, under salinity stress. Plants can deal with salinity, but it's a high metabolic cost for them to remove salt from the water. So if they are under or growing in a very high saline soil, they may be more susceptible to mortality from repeated defoliation. If they're sitting right next to the river with their feet in the water, it's likely that they will never be completely killed, but we do see what's called branch mortality, with sections of tamarisk dying and overall green cover being reduced. Next slide, please. This becomes a real issue for this little guy. So this is the southwestern willow flycatcher, an endangered species. Was listed in '95, but then the critical habitat, which affects a lot of restoration areas in the Southwest, was defined in 2013. The flycatcher is dependent, next slide please, on tamarisk in the absence of native willow. In fact, it seems to prefer mixed stands of willow and tamarisk, but does exist in stands that are entirely tamarisk. It was originally, the beetle is expected to move 1 to 2 kilometers a year. Once it was in the wild and exploded in numbers, we could find that they can move 20 miles a year. So they were not originally permitted for release within 200 miles of a known willow flycatcher nest in tamarisk, but once they released and got out there, we found that whereas originally that meant 50 to 100 years before the beetles would get to where the birds were, now all of a sudden we're talking 10 years. And then we had an unauthorized release in the Virgin River drainage in 2005. Next slide, please. Which led to this. Now notice the dates here. This is basically 3 weeks from full foliation to complete defoliation in the Virgin River Valley. Next slide, please. This can affect the birds by reducing cover that not only provides visibility and increases the risk of predation and parasitism by cowbirds, but can lead to death of the chicks because of overheating. Next slide, please. The birds can recover if there are native willows available for them to do so. So this is just some data from the St. George area in the Virgin River, that very low chick success the first year the beetles were there, but then the birds were smart, figured it out, and moved to native willow. The problem is in a lot of places in the Southwest, there's no longer native willow for the birds to move to. Next slide, please. The Tamarisk Coalition worked with the Department of Agriculture in Palisade here, and also with UC Santa Barbara to develop landscape scale monitoring to figure out where the beetle is going to try to help land managers along the way. Next slide, please. The next series of slides, we're going to quickly go through the spread of the beetle across the landscape. The colors in this represents numbers of beetle, with high numbers being the red. And I'm actually just going to have you go through, just hang out for a couple of seconds on each slide for a series of about 5 slides here as we see the beetle expand. So this is 2007, next slide, 2008, 2009. You can just see them expand and expanding from the release down the Virgin River. So moving all across the west, you can hold here for a second. You can see that they've now moved into the Arkansas Basin too, where they were purposefully released by the Department of Ag here in Colorado. And now the colors of the dots represent years, so that you can really kind of get an idea of how that expansion occurred over the years. The next slide, we get some data from Texas. So they were actually released in Texas early on, but we did not have that data, so they didn't just all of a sudden jump there. So in Texas and then they just continue to expand from there as well. Next slide. This is in 13, and then 14. Next slide. Okay, hold here for 1 second. So all of the white dots you see here are areas that the beetle has been monitored for but is not present. All of the kind of aqua dots is where they were last year, and you can see them moving up the Rio Grande, and but they've kind of been stalled out in Arizona. Next slide, please. This relates to it's kind of a busy slide I stole from one of our biologists in Texas that does a lot with genetics in the beetle. But this is just to give you an idea of the beetle's range versus some of the critical habitat area. And this is from 2014, but look specifically right in the middle at that Elephant Buttes Reservoir. That is just completely occupied by beetles as of this year. And over in Arizona, under the label there of Roosevelt Lake, all of that area as of this year has been completely occupied by beetles as well. So outside of the Virgin River, next slide please, the beetle has moved into a lot of critical habitat areas this year for the first time, and we're really going to be seeing the results of that next year. So every year we produce an annual map. I'm working on data for this year's. Next slide please. You can go to ArcGIS online and type in Tamaris Coalition and go to an interactive map of that data. And I should have that up here within the next couple of months. They'll have all previous historical data as well as this year. And then my last slide is, if you really want to learn a lot more about the beetle, we do have a workshop coming up in Las Vegas in about a week and a half, and it'll be 1 day of all things beetle, including a lot of information about endangered species as well as restoration incorporating the beetle. And I'm out.
Thanks, Ben. This is Kristen Jesperson again with the Tamaris Coalition, and once again we'll take a different direction here and talk a little bit more about some of the activities and the resources needed to make restoration work happen, and the processes that go behind that. Next slide, please. I wanted to take an opportunity to just kind of think about some of the activities beyond just the on-the-ground work that are involved in a given restoration project. I think typically folks associate restoration with the invasive plant removal and revegetation work, but there's a lot of activities and work components that are involved in making that possible that go on behind the scenes. That involves a lot of project planning, which is extensive effort to determine where and how work will take place, some of the permitting involved, treatment schedules, considering impacts on species, some of what Ben just covered, and some of the best removal techniques in a given location given the various constraints. Then there's the implementation, which typically refers to the actual removal of the plant, and some of the revegetation depending on what the given site requires. After that takes place, there's monitoring, and that can, there are many different types of monitoring, including rapid monitoring and then long-term monitoring and watershed-wide monitoring. Depending on the goals of your project, you're going to carry out various types of monitoring. And then there's maintenance, taking the results of your monitoring and determining what follow-up treatments need to take place, whether that's retreating a site or treating it for secondary weeds. And in the course of doing all of this, you're going to typically, if you're working at a watershed scale and with multiple partners, need to undertake ongoing coordination, and that requires meeting with all of the various practitioners involved, and raising the funding necessary to make this work possible. And just as a kind of perspective, a lot of these projects take anywhere from 10 to 20 years to achieve their end goals of restoring a site to the intended conditions. So these are long-term projects and they require a great deal of investment. So fundraising over the course of that period can be a challenging prospect. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges that these groups face in carrying out this work due to the duration of the project work and the constraints of the capacity that they have are that a lot of the public funding that is available for this work tend to be granted out in 1 to 2 year periods. So if you're trying to do work that takes place over many years, you have to repeatedly reapply, which isn't guaranteed that you'll get that funding in subsequent years. And you only have a certain amount of time that you can do that project work in. So it can be kind of a mad rush to get certain activities completed. Also, public funding really tends to focus on that implementation phase and not so much on the monitoring and maintenance and the coordination and the fundraising, which is inherent in a given successful project. So a lot of partnerships that are carrying out this work are scrambling to fund the other components of this work, and without the coordination and fundraising specifically, you can't carry out the implementation and the monitoring and maintenance. Since this restoration work is long-term, many of the funders, which are kind of the staples for this project work, experience fatigue, seeing the same applications year in and year out, and sometimes that will lead them to not fund this project work. So partnerships need to get creative about how they will fund their work through new funding streams. And there's a pretty small pool of public funding available through federal programs and then through a given state. So that requires some really extensive thinking on how to come up with new funding streams for this work. Private funding, which is an arena of funding which is less tapped than the public funding, tends to provide significant upfront investment and then tends to kind of move on to other projects. So that seed funding is available up front, but then leaves a big gap for these projects to have to backfill in terms of funding staff and so forth. So it's always appreciated to have this capacity funding, but if it's not ongoing, it can be a challenge to figure out alternative funding streams for that project work. And finally, private fundraising can be a little bit more challenging and more rigorous than just applying for a federal or state grant, which can be just a kind of a few-week endeavor. Private fundraising really requires relationship building, ongoing communication with those funders, and working with multiple prospects simultaneously to sustain their interest in and relationship with your organization. So that requires expertise and a time commitment that many of these partnerships do not have because they're really focused on the implementation and technical aspects of that project work. Next slide. I don't have a slide dedicated to this, but I did want to mention that many of the strategies that partnerships that are working on these projects carry out is to work with funding subcommittees. So if they are like the Friends of the Verde River Greenway and the Verde Watershed Restoration Coalition, if they're working together with multiple partners, they will convene a funding subcommittee, and through that committee, identify who the best prospect is to apply for various funding opportunities. So in many cases, they expand their opportunities and their chances of being a viable candidate for funding by looking at who is the best applicant given their various strengths and scopes. So that's one strategy to overcome some of these challenges as a partnership. To this slide, I just wanted to kind of provide a quick visual that illustrates what the typical breakdown of a restoration funding looks like versus what the ideal breakdown of your average nonprofit's funding portfolio would look like. And this is really just to say there tends to be a significant dependence on public funding for this project work and we, as the Tamarack Coalition, and me in my role as a funding program coordinator, are trying to work with these partnerships to help them expand and diversify the funding sources that they're able to bring in to support this work, so that they have more stability in terms of the overall types of funding that are coming in. If, for example, we encounter another economic crisis, or if certain public budgets are constrained for whatever reason, certain funding programs may go away, which could have a huge impact on these projects. They don't have other sources to lean on. So it's really just the best practice to have diversified funding. And also, there is more opportunity to spend private dollars in a way that meets your non-implementation needs. So in other words, private funding tends to be more discretionary or more unrestricted, allowing you to focus those dollars on supporting those coordinating, planning, monitoring, and maintenance project work components, and support kind of all of the pieces of the puzzle. Next slide, please. I just wanted to walk through some of the various both public and private funding streams that have successfully funded this work. Anna hit on a few of these, but I think it's worth mentioning that there are a lot of programs that are successfully funding this work continuously. The first is the Bureau of Land Management's Healthy Lands Initiative, which has target focus areas and invests in those and funds not just implementation work, but a spectrum of other capacity building activities as well. The National Park Service Challenge Cost Share Grant Program works with partners that are working on National Park Service lands and funds a spectrum of conservation, recreation, environmental stewardship, education, and youth engagement activities. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has a number of grant programs that fund restoration-related work, including the Pulling Together Initiative, the Environmental Solutions for Communities, the 5-Star, and the Developing the Next Generation grants. And those all fund various kind of aspects of restoration work and do so successfully. Also, the U.S. Forest Service Redesign Grant, which is a grant program that the state Forest Service agencies can apply for, funds not only work on Forest Service land, but on adjacent private lands. So it can be a really useful source of funding to address watershed restoration activities on both private and public lands. And then the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program is a great program for working with private landowners to get dollars on the ground to do a wide array of restoration activities on private land. Next slide, please. In terms of state funding programs, there are many of them, and this is just a small sampling, but these do reflect programs that are funding this work at pretty significant levels. The Utah Partnership for Conservation and Development Watershed Restoration Initiative grant program leverages state and federal funding and private funding to fund target restoration activities throughout Utah. The Colorado Invasive Phyreatophyte Control Program funds targeted invasive plant removal activities and supports monitoring activities as well. The Arizona Water Protection Fund provides funds for the protection and restoration of Arizona rivers and streams and riparian habitats, and has done so for a couple decades now. And the Arizona Invasive Plant Grant Program also funds riparian restoration activities throughout Arizona, and has done so for a while now. Next slide. In terms of private funding, Anna mentioned the Walton Family Foundation. Their freshwater initiative has been a really key funding program for multiple partnerships, because they have really taken this angle of investing not only in the project work, but in the organizations that are carrying that out. So they have taken the approach of committing to funding capacity and monitoring for a minimum of 5 years in the watersheds where they have a focused interest, and that has really made allowed these partnerships to make huge strides in carrying out this work significantly and effectively. And as Anna mentioned, they have invested in also some of the project goals that go beyond just the ecological goals, but also investing in recruiting youth to work on these projects as well. So that's been in large part motivated by their interest in making sure that youth are invested in and have growth through these projects. In Colorado, the Gates Family Foundation has become another key investor in some of these projects, and they've taken the angle of investing in the partnerships and the capacity that goes into this work. And then finally, the Tamara's Coalition is in the process of launching a fundraising campaign that is intended to invest in all of those components of project work that I mentioned in my first slide that tend to be underfunded. So the planning, the coordination, the monitoring, the maintenance, by bringing in our relationships and building new relationships with private funders to invest in 9 watershed partnerships that are participating in this 2-year campaign, and to bring them an infusion of capital and also some of the resources they need to increase that expertise for fundraising and build the tools kit that they need to be able to invest in private fundraising as their partnerships in and of themselves. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight some resources that the Tamara's Coalition offers in terms of fundraising. Those are all available at our website. We have a funding database that should be going live soon, and that is updated as regularly as it can be with upcoming grant opportunities. We have our Restore Our Rivers webpage, which will be launched soon, which has will have our case statement and an overview of that campaign. We also have resources such as our cost calculator and various fund tracking templates for partnerships that are trying to keep track of all of the resources that are coming in to support their work. And we have a wide array of research on various sustainable funding mechanisms. And this is my contact information. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much. At this point, if you have questions for any of the presenters, please type them into the question box. And we've got one question already. Well, and we did have a question that's been answered already about being able to get the PowerPoint as well as watching this later from the National Invasive Plant Council website. And what we're going to do is produce it as a PDF and have that available for people to download as well. So the first question that we have is about Johnson grass, and says they have a huge problem with Johnson grass and suggestions for control. Any chance it will be listed as an invasive weed in Arizona?
This is Anna, and I can speak to that. The Southwest Vegetation Management Association, which is based out of Southwest here in just had our annual meeting, and there was some discussion about Johnson grass at the meeting. ADOT saying that they have very good success mowing Johnson grass, and then also glyphosate can be very effective as well. As far as our state noxious weed list, SWVMA is working with the state to reopen our noxious weed list to add some species to that list that we've been working to control, and more discussion will occur later. If you're interested in taking part in that discussion, you can get in touch with me, and I can keep you in the loop.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. The next question I'll see, and I've asked them a question to clarify it. What is the response of the local community to herbicide application, And I asked, I'm assuming they mean, and they answered yes. So people living nearby, what is their response to herbicide application?
This is Anna again. We've had pretty good luck in that. You know, with the private landowners that we're working with, it's a voluntary program, of course, and so we work with each landowner individually, determine what their needs are, and in some cases we've worked with landowners that don't want herbicide used on their property, so we've developed other alternatives. Especially if we can get machinery into the riparian area, we're able to use practices like mowing to get rid of these species. And in some cases, landowners have been very effective in using brush hogs to totally control large arundo stands on the river. But in many cases, it's the riparian area doesn't allow that. We do use aquatically approved herbicides on all of our projects and do a lot of education in the community to educate on how we're applying it and the effects of the herbicide as well. So we really haven't had a lot of negative backlash on that, and I think people understand the scale that we're working on require, if we're really going to control these plants on a watershed scale, that herbicide is necessary as a cost-effective tool.
Okay. Anyone else have an input on that? And I thought I had the last slide y'all had requested available here. Let me try to open that again. Okay, I'm going to try and save it and see if that works. Let's see. Another question. They're asking for Anna's contact information. I'm hoping that's what's on the last slide. So since it sounds like many river systems are altered in ways such that the hydrologic regime favors invasives, are there efforts to shift flow management? If not, how do you choose projects where you're not working against the natural tendencies of the watershed? And there's additional questions to that. So,
this is Anna again. We are working very closely with the Nature Conservancy on flow restoration projects within the watershed. We do have a lot of diversions within the Verde that are major vectors for weeds, but also, you know, part of the flow restoration project that we're working on is to improve irrigation efficiencies, both conveyance and on-farm irrigation efficiencies, so that we're keeping as much water in the river as possible, but still providing those landowners with water rights, the rights that they own. You know, one of the other things that our partnership is working on is identifying erosion problems where we're having stream bank stabilization problems in our riparian that are contributing to some of this down cutting, but also our ephemeral washes being vectors for some of these weeds as well.
okay, and the second part is, are there places where you figure the non-natives are necessary to provide habitat?
In the Verde, you know, we have a very intact native riparian community, and so our system, there's very few spots where we have large monocultures of these invasives. As you get closer to some of the impediments, Bartlett and Horseshoe Dam, of course, we see more and more of these monocultures. And those are areas that we really want to work in to provide refugia for the southwest willow flycatcher before the beetle arrives.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Ben.
And
I would say, in general, there are definitely areas where just about the only habitat currently in place are invasive plants. And that's one thing, like Anna just said, we're trying to work to get natives back in there, and so that they do have something to move to. That's somewhat of an issue in some areas where, kind of as the other question alluded to, there's been so much hydrologic modification that it's difficult to get willows or anything in place. I mean, if you've got a tree like tamarisk established and has roots that go down 25 feet to a water table that's now down at 15 feet, it's going to be difficult to get natives that don't have such deep rooting tendencies in there. But it's a challenge that we need to work on and figure out if those areas where the native species are utilizing invasives are tamarisk dominated, because if the beetle is not there yet, it will be there eventually. It will eventually be throughout the entire system, and so yeah, something has to be developed.
And the next question, during the presentation, it sounded like once tamarisk is removed, native plant communities emerge naturally with little effort. Is more management involved, such as controlling new invasive species that pop up, or does removing the tamarisk fix the problem?
definitely, I think when we remove stands of tamarisk, we see sometimes secondary invasives coming in, and that's where monitoring is critical, so that we're just not shifting that invasion from a woody invasion to a herbaceous invasion. So that we've built that into our monitoring program, looking for those species and taking action based on what we're finding.
This is Ben again as well. There a lot that, I mean, it's a pretty complex question that a lot is dependent upon site, but we are seeing that in areas with a more natural hydrology, once the tamarisk has been removed, if you are still getting seasonal overbank flooding and such, there are some areas that passive restoration, in other words, the people not doing anything, is proving effective to get natives back in place. The native seed bank in a lot of cases is still there, but you really need that natural hydro period for it to just come back passively. And even then, you need to be in monitoring for anything else that might be in the system. But we are seeing in areas along the Colorado River where the tamarisk has been completely defoliated repeatedly, that native willows are coming back very strong without us doing anything.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Laura Norman with USGS has something that she just wanted to notify everyone of, and what I'm going to do is send that message out to everyone in the question box, so you should be able to see that. If you can't, let me know. And she's just letting you know that after the Tamarisk Coalition Conference, that there will also be Ecological Restoration Southwest Conference happening the 9th through the 11th, also in Las Vegas. So this is information on how to attend that if you would like to. And if anyone in the attendees can't see that, please let me know. Okay, next question. In the first presentation, they showed the removal of tamarisk and Russian olive, resulting in having the cottonwoods as a primary component of the riparian area. This reduces the structure component of the system and reduces the habitat available for southwestern flycatchers. Is that right? Are you saying this is successful?
This is Melissa. Well, maybe Ben can talk a little bit specifically about the southwestern roll flycatcher if I don't address everything, but typically they have requirements. Well, actually, in that area, there isn't southwestern roll flycatcher, to my knowledge. But typically, the southwestern willow flycatcher has requirements that there be a diverse structure. They like to have the tall trees, the mid shrubs, and then also to have standing water as well. So the goal for that particular project was not to create habitat for southwestern willow flycatcher, but in areas where the goal is to create more habitat for the southwestern willow flycatcher, we're taking into the consideration the specific requirements and needs for the southwestern willow flycatcher to try to mimic the habitat that they particularly like. So, ideally for the southwestern willow flycatcher, they like to have a lot of willows, Giddings willows and coyote willows as well. So trying to create that diverse matrix of an ecosystem along the areas where they live.
Okay, thank you. Next question, and we've got this one and one more. On the map showing the movement of the tamarisk beetle, it looked like it had moved into neighboring Mexico. Is there communication between countries regarding application of biocontrol?
Actually an interesting question, because there was not originally, and the beetle will eat any type of tamarisk, and there is another species of tamarisk called tamarisk aphylla, which grows in it's a much larger form, almost like a cottonwood. It kind of looks like a weeping willow cottonwood, and is one of the main, even though it's non-native, is one of the main shade trees for many of the villages in Mexico. And so the beetle did cross into Mexico and defoliate some of those trees, and of course they didn't know what was going on and actually cut down the trees before they were informed as to what it was. It's kind of sad, because they're such huge trees, they never would have been killed by defoliation. Since then, we have worked with Mexico to let them know about it. Mexico, actually, though, the data, the points you saw in Mexico, I get from a partner down there who works with the state of Chihuahua to spray tamarisk aphylla to protect it from the beetle. So Mexico is not really worried about using the beetle as a biocontrol, but is actually trying to prevent the beetle from attacking their large shade trees, which are typically non-invasive and just a big tree. So my Mexico contacts are actually spraying to keep the beetle off of large trees.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Last question. Have we seen biological controls accidentally control native plants it was not supposed to? And I would kind of add to that, in recent years, more recent years, because I know many, many years ago that may have happened, but have you seen that happening over the last decade, say?
No. To my knowledge, I think the one you're talking about, I think there was one in the early 1900s that did do some damage to something native. But no, nothing in many, many decades has ever moved. They really do, I mean, they do years of host specificity testing to see if anything will transfer to another species. One of the reasons that it was thought for a while we would never have a biocontrol for Russian olive is because we have some native Elaeagnus in the area, the buffalo berry. Now they're actually working with not an insect, but a rust on Russian olive to develop it, because it is not just genus specific, but species specific. So no, we've never had, in modern history, there's never been a biocontrol that was purposefully released that transferred to a different non-target species.
Okay, thank you. And I know, for example, there have been in the southeast things that appeared, were introduced accidentally that did, like kudzu bug targeting kudzu, that may also have some effect on some native species, but that was not done on purpose.
Right, right.
Okay, well, Anna, Ben, Kristen, and Melissa, thank you very much. This has been a great webinar and very informative, and some great questions were asked. Thank you for attending, and this will be available on the National Invasive Plant Council website within 24 to 48 hours.
I thought this was natural.
I'm sorry, what?
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.